Pause for a moment. Something quiet, almost invisible, has already begun to move toward you, and you didn't even notice it at first. It didn't arrive with noise, it didn't announce itself loudly, it simply waited, patiently, as if it knew the exact second your heart would be ready to hear it. There's something you've been sensing lately, isn't there? Not clearly, not fully formed, but like a soft shift in the air around you. A feeling that someone, somewhere, has been holding on to words they never spoke directly to you, yet somehow, those words have been circling closer and closer. And here's where everything becomes a little different than you expected. Because this message, it wasn't meant to reach you in the usual way. It was shared, whispered, expressed to others, carried through conversations that didn't include you, and yet, every sentence, every emotion, was about you. Strange, isn't it? Why would someone speak so openly, to everyone else, except the one person it truly belongs to? Think about that for a second. Not because they didn't want you to know, but because something inside them hesitated, something unfinished, something they weren't ready to face directly. But here's the part you might not have seen coming. What they said about you was not ordinary. It wasn't casual, it wasn't careless, it wasn't something they could easily forget after saying it. No. It carried weight. It carried a kind of truth that only shows up when someone has been thinking deeply, for longer than they admit. And you might be wondering, what exactly did they say? Stay with this for a moment, because rushing this part would take away its meaning. Before those words ever left their lips, there was a moment of silence, a pause that felt longer than it should have, as if they were deciding whether to finally let something hidden rise to the surface. And then, slowly, they spoke, but not in the way you expect. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a tone that surprised even them. They told others that you are not who people think you are. Let that settle. Not in a negative way, not as a misunderstanding, but as a realization. They said that there's something about you that most people overlook, something deeper, something quieter, something that doesn't show itself immediately. And here's where the energy shifts again. Because when they said this, the room changed. People didn't respond right away. It's almost as if your name carried a presence, even in your absence. Have you ever felt that before? That strange awareness that someone is speaking about you somewhere, and somehow, a part of you senses it? This was one of those moments. But what made it different was what came next. They didn't stop there. They leaned forward, slightly, as if they were about to reveal something they had been holding back for a long time. And then they said something that surprised even them. They said, "You are not just someone passing through their life." Pause. You are not temporary. You are not replaceable. And you are definitely not someone they can easily forget. But here's the twist that makes this even more important. They didn't say this to you. They said it to everyone else. Why? Because sometimes, the truth feels easier to speak when the one person who matters most isn't in front of you. Because saying it to you would mean facing what it truly means. And that is what they haven't fully done yet. But listen closely now, because this is where the message begins to unfold in a way you didn't expect. There was a moment, right after they spoke those words, when someone asked them a simple question. Then why haven't you told them? And suddenly, everything paused again. No immediate answer. No quick explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that reveals more than words ever could. And in that silence, something deeper was happening. They were realizing something. Not about you, but about themselves. Don't skip this part, because this is where everything starts to shift. They realize that what they feel isn't something they can keep hidden forever, that the way they see you isn't something that can stay unspoken. And yet, there's still something holding them back. Not fear in the way you might think, but something more subtle. Uncertainty, timing, the feeling that when they finally say it to you, everything will change. And once it changes, there's no going back to how things were before. So they wait, they observe, they think, and in the meantime, they talk about you to everyone else. Isn't that interesting? But here's what you need to understand, and this is important. What they said about you wasn't just words. It was a reflection of how deeply you've impacted them, even in ways you may not realize. Because you've done something without even trying. You've created a presence in their life that doesn't fade easily. And now, they're starting to notice that more clearly than ever before. But wait. There's something else, something even more specific, that hasn't been fully revealed yet. Because the message they shared wasn't complete. Not yet. There was one part they didn't say out loud. One thought they kept to themselves. One realization that stayed inside, waiting. And that part, that missing piece, is the reason this message feels urgent now. Can you feel it? That subtle tension, like something unfinished, something waiting just beyond reach? It's not random. It's not coincidence. It's the moment before something becomes clear. And you are closer to that clarity than you think. But before that final piece comes forward, there's something you need to recognize first. Because this isn't just about what they said. It's about what it means for you. About why this message is finding its way toward you now, instead of before. Because timing plays a bigger role than most people realize. And right now, something is aligning. Something is quietly preparing to shift. And the next part of this message is where everything starts to become impossible to ignore. Something subtle is beginning to rise now, like a quiet truth finally reaching the surface after being held down for too long. And if you listen carefully, you can almost feel the shift before you fully understand it. Because what they didn't say is starting to become louder than everything they already shared. There's a moment you weren't there for, but somehow, it still connects to you. A moment where they were alone, no audience, no conversations, no need to explain themselves to anyone, just them, and their own thoughts. And that's when it happened. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, like something unfolding from within. They replayed everything. Every interaction, every small detail, every time you crossed their mind without warning. And here's the part that changed everything for them. They realized it wasn't random. It wasn't occasional. It wasn't something they could dismiss anymore. You have been on their mind more than they ever admitted. Pause for a second. Because this realization didn't come with comfort. It came with awareness. The kind that makes you stop and question everything you thought you understood. And for them, it led to a question they couldn't ignore anymore. What does this actually mean? Not in a confused way, but in a way that carried weight. Because deep down, they already knew the answer. They just weren't ready to say it out loud. But here's where it becomes even more meaningful. They didn't just think about what you are to them. They started to think about what they are to you. Feel that shift? It's different. It's deeper. Because now, it's not just about their feelings. It's about their place in your world. And suddenly, things didn't feel as simple as before. They began to wonder. Have they been distant without realizing it? Have they held back when they should have moved forward? Have they said everything, or have they been avoiding something important? And in that quiet space, without anyone around, They saw something clearly for the first time. They've been holding on to something real, while pretending it's not as important as it actually is. Don't miss this moment. Because this is where the urgency begins to form. Not from pressure, not from fear, but from realization. The kind that doesn't fade once it appears. The kind that stays with you, even when you try to distract yourself from it. And now, they can't ignore it anymore. But here's the part that makes this even more intense. They've already tried to move past it. Yes, they attempted to convince themselves that it wasn't something they needed to act on. They told themselves it would fade, that it would settle, that it would eventually become just another thought, another memory. But it didn't. It stayed. It returned. It grew stronger in the moments they least expected. And every time it came back, it carried the same message. You can't leave this unfinished. Let that sink in. Because unfinished things have a way of pulling you back, again and again, until they are finally understood. And that's exactly where they are now. Standing in a space where ignoring this is no longer an option. But still, they hesitate, not because they don't feel it, but because they are starting to understand how much it actually matters. And when something matters that deeply, it changes how you approach it. It makes you careful. It makes you think twice. It makes you pause before you speak. Because once it's said, everything shifts. And here's what you might not expect. They've already come close to telling you. Closer than you think. There were moments, small ones, almost invisible, where they nearly let it out. A sentence that almost formed. A message that almost got sent. A conversation that almost turned into something more. But each time, they stopped, right at the edge. Why? Because something inside them said, not yet. Not because the feeling isn't real, but because they want it to be right. And this is where the message becomes urgent. Because, not yet, is slowly turning into, it has to be now. Can you feel that shift? That quiet pressure building, not from outside, but from within them. Because holding on to something real, without expressing it, eventually becomes heavier than saying it. And they're reaching that point. But there's one more layer to this. Something even more personal, that they haven't shared with anyone. Not with their friends. Not in those conversations where your name came up. Not even in their quiet reflections. This part, they've only felt. And this is the part that changes everything. Stay with this. Because this is where the message begins to take its true shape. It's not just about what they think of you. It's not just about what they feel. It's about what they're starting to realize you mean, in their life. And once that realization becomes clear, there's no going back to silence. No returning to how things were before. No pretending it's something small. And that moment, that exact realization, is closer than ever now. But here's the thing. When it finally surfaces, when they finally understand it fully, the way they reach out to you, the way they speak, the way they show up, it won't be the same as before. It can't be, because something inside them is already changing, quietly, deeply, irreversibly. And the next part of this message is where that change becomes visible. There's a quiet moment forming, almost like the air itself is holding its breath, because something within them has finally reached a point where it can no longer stay hidden, and this time, it feels different. Not uncertain, not scattered, but clear. For the first time, they are no longer questioning what this means. They are recognizing it. Pause here for a second. Because recognition changes everything. It takes something from being a thought, and turns it into truth. And once something becomes truth, it doesn't fade the way passing thoughts do. It stays. It grows. It asks to be seen. And this is exactly where they are now. They're no longer trying to explain it away. No longer telling themselves it's temporary. No longer pretending it will simply pass. Instead, they are starting to accept it. Fully. Quietly. But deeply. And here's the part that shifts the entire direction of this story. They've stopped asking, "What is this feeling?" and started asking, "What am I going to do about it?" Feel that difference? That's where everything begins to move, because a feeling can stay still. But a decision cannot. And right now, a decision is forming. Not rushed, not forced, but steady, like something that has been building beneath the surface, finally finding its way upward. And in that space, they are seeing you differently, not just as someone who came into their life, but as someone who changed the way they see things, the way they think, the way they feel, and even the way they understand themselves. That's not something small. That's something rare. And they know it now. But here's where the intensity rises again. Because with that realization comes responsibility. The understanding that they can't keep this quiet forever. That they can't continue acting as if nothing has shifted. That they can't stay in the comfort of silence when something real is asking to be expressed. And yet, there's still one final hesitation. Not about you, not about what they feel, but about timing, always timing. Because they are aware that when they finally say it, it will reach you, it will land, and it will change the space between you. So they wait. Not out of avoidance, but out of awareness. But here's what they didn't expect. That waiting would become harder than speaking. That holding it in would feel heavier than letting it out. That silence would start to feel like distance. And they don't want distance. Not anymore. This is important. Because when someone stops being comfortable with distance, they begin moving closer. And that movement has already begun. Subtle, but real. You might not have seen it yet. You might not have noticed the shift in their energy, the way they think about you, the way they carry your presence even when you're not there. But it's happening, and it's building, because now, they're not just thinking about what to say, they're thinking about how to say it, how to express something that doesn't feel simple, how to put into words something that feels deeper than words. And in that process, they've realized something else. Something even more personal. They don't want to say it halfway. They don't want to speak in fragments. They don't want to leave room for misunderstanding. They want you to feel it, clearly, fully, honestly. Let that sink in. Because that kind of intention doesn't come from uncertainty. It comes from clarity. And clarity is what makes this message real. But here's the moment you didn't see coming. There was a shift, recently. A small one, almost invisible, but powerful. Something happened, something they heard, or saw, or felt. That made everything inside them align all at once. Like pieces that were scattered, suddenly fitting together. And in that moment, they knew. Not partially, not maybe, but completely. This is it. This is what they've been holding on to. This is what they've been circling around. This is what they can't ignore anymore. And from that moment, everything changed. Because now, It's not about whether they will say it, it's about when. And that when is no longer far away. Can you feel that? That quiet certainty that something is approaching. Something that has been building through every moment, every thought, every realization, is now moving toward expression. But here's the part that brings everything together. This message they've been carrying. It's not complicated. It's not hidden behind layers. It's actually very simple. But simple things are often the hardest to say, because they carry the most truth, and the truth they've been holding. The one they shared with everyone else. The one they kept from you. The one that stayed unspoken. Is finally ready to be revealed. Stay with this. Because what they're about to express is not just about what you are to them, but about what they no longer want to lose. And that moment, that exact moment when they finally let it reach you, is closer than you think. And just when it feels like everything has been building quietly beneath the surface, something inside them finally reaches its edge, not in chaos, not in urgency, but in a calm, undeniable knowing that can no longer be pushed aside. There was no dramatic trigger, no sudden event that forced this realization. It was softer than that. A moment of stillness, where everything else faded for a second, and all that remained was you. Not your voice, not your presence, but the feeling of you. Pause here. Because that's when it became clear to them. This isn't something they can carry silently anymore. This isn't something that belongs in conversations with others. This isn't something that should exist everywhere, except where it truly matters. And for the first time, they felt something they hadn't allowed themselves to feel before. Not confusion, not hesitation, but a quiet certainty, mixed with a kind of urgency they couldn't ignore. The kind that doesn't rush you, but doesn't let you stay still either. And that's when they understood something important. They've been telling everyone else, because deep down, they were preparing themselves to tell you. Let that settle. Every word they spoke about you, every time your name came up, every realization they shared. It wasn't random. It was practice. Not rehearsed in a forced way, but natural, like they were slowly building the courage to face the one moment that actually matters. The moment where it reaches you, because saying it to others doesn't change anything, but saying it to you changes everything. And now, they are standing right at that point, not before it, not far from it. Right at the edge. Don't miss this feeling. Because this is where the energy shifts from reflection to action. They are no longer just thinking, no longer just processing, no longer just observing from a distance. They are preparing to say something that has been waiting longer than they admit. But here's what makes this even more meaningful. They're not approaching this casually. They're not treating it like something light, something they can say and move on from. They feel the weight of it, not in a heavy way, but in a real way, because they understand that what they're about to say carries truth, and truth has a way of changing the space it enters. Take a breath here. Because the next part is where everything becomes clear. The message they've been holding. The one they told others. The one they kept from you. It's not complicated. It's not hidden behind layers. It's something simple, but deeply felt. They've been trying to describe you. Trying to explain what you are to them. Trying to make sense of why you stand out in a way no one else does. And after everything, after all the thinking, all the conversations, all the quiet moments, they've realized something they can no longer ignore. You are not just someone in their life. You are someone who changed the way their life feels. Pause. Not loudly, not suddenly, but in a way that stayed, in a way that didn't fade, in a way that kept returning, again and again, until it became impossible to overlook. And that's the truth they've been carrying. That's the message they've been speaking around, but not directly to you. And now, they don't want to keep it unspoken anymore, because keeping it hidden feels more distant than expressing it. And they don't want distance. Not now, not after everything they've realized. Feel that shift. It's no longer about hesitation, it's about alignment. Their thoughts, their feelings, their awareness, all pointing in the same direction, toward you, and toward the moment where everything finally becomes clear between you. But here's the final layer, the part that brings everything together in a way you might not expect. They're not just ready to speak, they're ready to be honest, fully, without holding back, without softening it, without leaving pieces unsaid, because they understand now that what they feel deserves to be expressed completely, and that moment is not something far away anymore. It's approaching, quietly, steadily, and when it arrives, it won't feel forced, it won't feel sudden, it will feel like something that was always meant to be said, finally finding its voice. Stay with this feeling, because the next moment, the one where this message truly reaches you, is not just about hearing words, it's about understanding something that has been building all along. And when it does, you'll realize this was never just a message, it was a turning point.